it's almost a deflection to put pressure on consumers to change their behavior. We know for decades that this is not working. This massive growth of stocks also means that the global economy cannot become circular, because if you want to have a physical system that is always increasing, you always need virgin inflows. Otherwise, first law of thermodynamics, yeah? Overall, at the level of world regions, you have a strong correlation between stocks and GDP. And it seems that the more developed countries, at a certain point, this relationship breaks. We should not create this image that we have to live a dull life with restrictions all around the place. Yeah, this will not be an attractive world to show to people. Yeah.
Today we will focus on the topic of societal lock-in effects. While cities and countries are heavily investing in renewable energy and low-carbon technologies, we fail to see an overall reduction of our emissions. Indeed, our current infrastructures are locking us into consuming more and more resources and emitting more and more pollutions. So how do we get out this vicious circle? And is it possible to use infrastructures to lock us into more just and desirable futures? To help us navigate these questions, I have with me today Professor Helmut Haberl. Helmut is a professor in socio-ecological metabolism at BOKU University in the Institute of Social Ecology. His research focuses on the relationship between our resource use, their associated infrastructures, and the services that they provide to society. Welcome to the Circular Metabolism podcast, where we have in-depth discussions with researchers to better understand the metabolism of our societies and how to reduce their socio-ecological impact in a systemic, socially just, and context-specific way. As I mentioned, you are a professor in social ecological metabolism. For the people who don't know what this is, there's already a couple of words there that might be a bit unfamiliar with people.
Yes.
Why do you use the term metabolism? What is a social metabolism or socio-ecological metabolism?
Yeah, actually, socio-ecological metabolism and social metabolism isn't exactly the same. But let's first clarify why we speak about metabolism. The idea is that you can look at social systems as in analogy to organisms, yeah, which is not to say that we would believe a society is an organism. Of course, it is not. Also, the level of integration is much lower. Yeah, it doesn't really have, organs like a heart or a lung or something like that. Yeah, but still. So what it means is the resource flows into a society, all the conversions in resources during production and consumption, including recycling, yeah, and the build-up of material stocks, like the built structures, buildings, infrastructures, but also, of course, all the products we are using, from machinery to cell phones to fridges to recording devices, whatever you use is an artifact produced, yeah, from natural resources that are being transformed through supply chains, different stages of manufacturing processes, yeah, until you have the final product that then plays a big role for the services that can be provided to society. That may be crucial for social well-being, that are crucial for achieving decent living standards for all, and so on. And also at the same time, these built structures and the products and the machinery and so on, including vehicles and so on, they also shape our routines of our daily activities, which is what we call practices. Yeah. So the idea being that as humans, we go through the day performing certain practices, routinized activities that are mostly performed more or less automatically. And it's also not the individual
choice,
choosing a certain practice, but at certain points in your life, you become practitioner of a certain practice that is actually a social structure. Yeah. That has three key dimensions when you want to analyze them. One is meaning, the cultural dimension. The second would be know-how, or knowing how to do certain things. Yeah. So capabilities. Yeah. And the third is the material. And this goes from infrastructure to machinery you need, products you need to perform a certain practice. Yeah. And that's, of course, where you have the link to social metabolism. Yeah. And one of the key claims we make here is that these physical structures, infrastructures, built structures, and their qualities, their spatial patterns, they determine much, if not most, of all the resources a society uses. Yeah. And so in my view, it's almost a deflection to put pressure on consumers to change their behavior. We know for decades that this is not working. It's actually creating resistance. Yeah. So if you really want to change consumption patterns, you have to think, in my view, about these practices. So how practices and practitioners meet. So in other words, when do individuals become practitioners of a specific practice? And an example of a specific practice would be a specific mode of getting to work, for example. So you might walk, you might go by bicycle, you might go by car, you might use public transit. And this need not be exclusive. So some people, go by bicycle on sunny days and they go by public transit when it's raining or something. Yeah. But usually it's kind of something where under certain conditions a person will not think about, well, should I go by car today or should I go by bicycle today? It's just, you do it every day and you do it. And either you do it entirely the same every day, or you have two modes between you switch based on relatively simple criteria. But this is also important because, you would be in agony if you would
every day have
to decide
for everything
on each of your activities. You would be in agony because this would require a lot of decisions. And most of them you do not make anew every day. Yeah. And this is also, I think, a fierce criticism of this kind of, idea of having fully informed, rationally choosing individuals, this rational choice or the bounded rationality ideas in mainstream economics. Yeah.
Homo economicus and all
yes,
that.
I mean, I'm not saying that prices or product qualities have no influence, because at a certain point people choose to often or mostly buy a specific product when they do their groceries. Yeah. So I'm not saying this is completely irrelevant, but it is so poor compared to the multitude of things that influence these decisions. Yeah. And in many cases, there are specific points in life where people become practitioners of a specific practice or abandon being practitioners of a specific practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other important thing about the service component, of course, you can have the idea that the purpose of having social metabolism is because we want the services. Yeah. But specific ways of providing services can be very different. And it's often it's often claimed that it would be only serving the preferences of consumers. But in many cases, this is actually not a good explanation of what actually happens.
Yeah.
Because you have certain infrastructure patterns, you have settlement patterns, yeah, and their design incentivizes, supports, yeah, makes attractive certain practices and discourages many others. Yeah. And so, for example, in mobility, yeah, built structures even enter legal conditions. For example, if you have, if you lose your job and you get insurance, yeah, how is it called? Social security insurance, right? and you are offered a job, there are criteria which kinds of jobs you can decline. And these criteria include how long it takes you to get to the place, to the workplace. Yeah. And this assumes that you have a car and will be ready to use it to get to your workplace. And if you decline a job where you would need less than an hour by car, if there is the road in place, yeah, and you don't have a good health reason for not being able to use a car, yeah, you might lose your job, your unemployment insurance, no? So these physical structures, they enter the fabric of society, yeah? And through that, they are enormously powerful in supporting certain practices, discouraging other practices. And so in many cases, when you think about that only at the behavior level, which is just the tip of the iceberg of what you can observe when you look what people do, yeah, this is behavior, yeah, but this is so poor compared to the many things that lead to specific behaviors, and there I think it's much more useful to look at practices, right? So, and therefore the design of settlement patterns in transport infrastructure patterns, for example, are hugely important for resource use. Yeah, first because you need huge amounts of resources to build them. Then you need huge amounts of resources to maintain them. It's shocking how frequently you have to pave over roads. Yeah, yeah. If they are well used, it might be every 10 years that you have to pave over. No? So you need a whole lot of asphalt and sand and gravel to kind of maintain roads functioning. Yeah. But of course, once you have a dispersed settlement pattern, like in urban sprawl, it is very, very likely that the dominant mobility pattern will be going by car, because it is very, very hard to be mobile in that situation. Well, if you are stuck there, yeah, it's basically in many cases, that's what we call car dependency, yeah. And so this is certainly one of the patterns that we create using a lot of resources, and that's what is this video is on. We can show that. No? It's really impressive. So you see in the last 45 years how Austria is covered by urban sprawl, and how really the entire habitable part of Austria is kind of being turned into artifacts, and meaning built structures covering almost the whole habitable. I mean, not, there's still cropland left and grassland left, yeah. The fraction of the area that is used is not so large, yeah. But almost the entire area is already sprawled, meaning that there's many people living in these sprawled environments, yeah. In highly car-dependent situations, which creates, and it's not only car-dependent, it's also, the single-family houses with a bad ratio of volume to surface, so you have higher heating energy demands. I mean, you have some advantages. It's easier to use photovoltaics, it's easier to use heat pumps and so on. So there are options to do something about, but it's still a super resource-intensive set of practices that you are at the end encouraging, right? Yeah. So with these car-dependent structures, you have a lot more cars. Yeah. For example, I don't know the exact numbers, so but I think in the average in Austria, the car ownership is about 600 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, and it's in Vienna it's I think 370, and declining for the last at least 10 years, if not more. Yeah, because in Vienna cars are actually not very useful. Yeah, especially since we have parking regulation on the entire area. Yeah, where you have parking zones. Yeah, where you can park only for 2 hours, and then you have to pay for that. Yeah. Going to Vienna with a car is actually a nuisance, yeah, and you only do it for certain reasons, but not regularly, usually, no? Unless you have to, no? or you have to find a parking space in a, you have to pay for that quite a lot of money and so on. And you have a very, very good public transit system. No? So that's why, these built structures shape practices. Yeah. And another example is if you were to redistribute street space from current patterns where almost the entire street space is used up for moving or parking cars, and redistribute that to people that are walking, cycling, playing with their kids because it's safe, because you're not endangered by cars, because it's not loud, because you don't have the air pollution, and the electric car will not solve that. There may not be air pollution from the exhaust, but you still have the tires, and you still have the risk of being run over, so you have to get rid of most cars in the densely settled areas, and then you can make them much more attractive for living there with kids. You can green them, and then you would very strongly reduce the urge of moving to the suburbs, which have many disadvantages, but they have some advantages, of course. It's green, you have your garden, you can have your kids playing. If you like gardening, you can do it, in the dense part of the city, you can't do those things, But some of those you could get back, but you have to redistribute street space. And this is another example where I think it could be quite powerful. There would also be tipping points involved. I have an example for a tipping point related to that. In Vienna, a big shopping street, Marilferstraße, was converted into it's called Begegnungszone. So it's
pedestrian zone.
No, it's not a pedestrian zone even. So you can drive through it by car, but maximum 10 kilometers an hour, and there's no parking space. So you cannot use it to go there by car. Yeah. And, it's very unattractive to go there by car. Yeah. Because, people are walking everywhere. So you are not really moving. Yeah. If you have to get through it, this is what you can do. But basically, it's very unattractive to drive there. And it was a hard fight, a political fight. Yeah. Because there was so strong opposition, of course, of the conservatives, of the shopkeepers, super strong battle, and it was won in a popular vote by a very small margin. After very strong lobbying effects of the Greens, which for them it was a flagship project to get it through, and they invested whatever they had because they knew they had to win that, and it almost failed, but And then, for the first 2 weeks, there was huge outcry. This is bad, this is bad, this is bad for all those who lost. And now, 2 months later, everyone was so happy because and then, there was some minor construction works to make it attractive. And now this is, 6 years power, 4 years, I have no idea. And no one would ever question it. All the shopkeepers are happy because it has improved. It has improved their situation. All the horror scenarios of all the bad things that would happen have not materialized. And no one today, if you would ask people whether they would revert, it would be 90% saying, I didn't do research into that, but my guess is that no one does, and no one would have the idea to revert that, I think.
You've summarized most of the crucial elements here. We mentioned about flows. Flows can be resource use or pollutions. We mentioned about stocks, which are these artifacts of, you pour resources into an artifact. You mentioned about practices and services. These are, let's say, the 4 pieces of the puzzle that we're looking at today. And you gave also some examples locally. I think I want to zoom out just a bit to understand how this, at a global level, what does that mean? Where are we? Why are we in this situation and all of that? Over there, I will show at the same time on the screen the two graphs, of course, of the global extraction from 1900 to 2015, and the same thing for the stock evolution. So extraction by a factor of 12 more or less increased, and the stock by a factor of 30 or something like that. Before we talked about the relationship between all those four components, like service, practice, stock, and flow. Now perhaps let's just focus on the stock and flow relationship. When we look at these two graphs and their growth, what do they tell us? What is this relationship?
Well, the point is, one thing that they tell us is an ever-increasing fraction of the resource flows is used to create new stocks. Yeah, that's why the stock component rises more strongly than the extraction, right? So this is one thing. And this also means an increasing fraction of resources is used for new buildings and infrastructures. Yeah. On the other hand, these buildings and infrastructures and their patterns lock us into very resource demanding ways of providing services and very resource guzzling practices or sets of practices that form the dominant routines of daily activities of people. No? This also means that this massive growth of stocks also means that the global economy cannot become circular, because if you want to have a physical system that is always increasing, you always need virgin inflows. Otherwise, first law of thermodynamics, yeah, the mass balance, yeah. And actually, there's a study, I don't know whether you know it, by Willy Haas and others. One came out in 2015, and the follow-up came out in 2020. That actually, these studies actually show that when you look at circularity indicators at the input side of social metabolism, meaning where resource extraction is transformed into primary products, and at the outflow side of social metabolism, where you have the wastes and the recycling and so on, which is kind of also part of circularity, but an overestimated part of circularity, then you will notice that in these 115 years, circularity has gone down on any of these indicators. Down, not up.
Wow.
Despite all talk about the circular economy.
And actions as well. I mean, many recycling plants, many, yeah.
And there are two main reasons. One is the substitution of biomass with fossil fuels, because biomass, and we could talk about the criteria for circularity of biomass. We have some criticism of that as well. But in this work, they distinguished between circular and non-circular biomass use by distinguishing between parts of biomass that are kind of carbon neutral, yeah, and parts that are not, that are actually taken from reducing the carbon stored in biota and soils, right? Data are not very good to distinguish that, but yeah, they made an effort to do that. So it means that most biomass use is circular, but not all, yeah. Whereas, of course, use of fossil fuels is almost exclusively not circular. I mean, part of fossil fuels, but a rather minor part, are used for plastics, yeah. Or other, other material uses, asphalt, for example. Yeah, we are talking about roads now. But most of them are just burned, and you can't have any circularity there because you do that because you want to gain energy, and you can do that only once because the chemical potential exists in the carbohydrates or in the carbon. But once you have the oxidation process going on, then the energy is released, and then you have CO2 and water, and you don't have any energy in that. So there is no circularity, For all the energetic use of fossil fuels, which is I think, between 90 and 95%. Yeah. There can be no circularity at all. And also the circularity for plastics and asphalt and stuff like that is not very high. Yeah. But this could in principle be improved. Yeah. But this is also a good example, I think, when you talk at the product level. Yeah. You would look at these products like plastic cups or whatever. Yeah. But this is just a tiny fraction of the problem. No? When you look at the input side, you see the fossil fuels. Then you see that 90 or 95% of them are used dissipatively. And there cannot be any circularity by definition.
Correct.
Yeah. And the other big problem why circularity has been going down and not up is due to this rising material stocks. Yeah. Because all the increases in material stocks cannot come from circularity or from circular forms of metabolism by definition.
Because they're new, yeah.
Because they're new.
Yeah.
So you need new inputs. You might not see that at the recycling end because some of that stuff may be recycled. Yeah. But as long as the stocks are growing, you cannot have full circularity by definition, just for mass balance reasons. Yeah. So these are the two main reasons for non-circularity that you do both actually not see when you only look at circularity at the product level, which is why we think it is super important. I mean, this is not to say optimizing circularity of products is a useless thing to do. No, of course not. It's useful to do that. Yeah, I'm not at all against it. Yeah, but we have to be aware. Yeah, that it may be a contribution, but it will not solve the problem. The problem is on the systemic level, right? It's these rising stocks. It's the lock-ins those stocks create, like, for example, certain unsustainable mobility patterns, like car-dependent structures that are created. The maintenance requirements, the larger the stocks are, the more material you will need to maintain them. Yeah. Of course, there are certain trade-offs between reducing flows or reducing certain flows and stock creation. For example, we also did a study of global power plants and distribution networks. And it is true that when you want to get to high PV and wind scenarios in the and we analyzed some of the scenarios in the IPCC scenario space. Of course, not all the 2,000, but some of them. Yeah, of those that achieved certain climate mitigation targets. And it is true you need a little bit more concrete and metals and so on for building these power plants. Yeah, because wind turbines, photovoltaics, they need more grids, yeah, and they need more materials per unit of energy delivered than a coal-fired power plant, yeah. But of course, you must not forget that you kind of get rid of all the coal use, yeah. And the material flows here are much larger. And you have mining conflicts here as well. So it's very polemic only to look at the materials you need for green energy and then say, well, this is bad because we have all these bad mining things and lithium and so on. And I'm not saying we shouldn't clean up our act here, yeah. But the volumes are, of course, much smaller than the volumes of fossil fuels that we have to burn to maintain fossil fuel-based energy systems. Yeah. So, yes, there are some of these trade-offs and it needs in detail assessment. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying we should neglect it, but I have also experienced, I think 4 years ago on Facebook, I found, one of these right-wing lobby groups working against wind power, misusing our study where we had looked at that by taking it out of context and citing some of the numbers and forgetting about the others. Yeah. And using them to say, well, how environmentally destructive and resource hungry wind power is, and not saying anything about, the natural gas from Russia and the oil from Kazakhstan and Saudi Arabia and the coal from South Africa or wherever in the world, no? And forgetting about all the mining problems there and,
Yeah.
So this is very polemic in the end, yeah, and we have to be aware that this can be, this is being abused, yeah. So I think it's very important to be sensitive. So I now never say one single sentence about, the problems of lithium mining or cobalt, yeah, with not at the same time and in the same sentence, so that it's hard to cut it out, yeah.
Yeah.
Also talk about the huge amounts of mining and extraction that is associated with the fossil fuels that we have in the current system, yeah, and that we are supposed to get rid of, yeah.
Yeah. So if we extract every year more or less 1 billion tons of materials, 1/10 is more or less coal, like 8 billion tons,
Yeah.
and steel is already like 2 or something like that, and copper and lithium is tiny compared to that.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
in
yeah.
orders of magnitude is like 1/100 of
Yes.
of
So
this.
these proportions are extremely important. And then this is only the coal, but then we have
Natural gas,
petroleum,
petroleum, yeah.
petroleum, yeah. And these are even larger volumes because coal has been going down a little bit anyway. So maybe it has been resuming, and I don't know. So,
Yeah.
but don't know the latest numbers. But overall, in most industrialized countries, it's now assuming a very, very minor part in the energy mix. Not in all. There are some like Poland,
Yeah.
they have for traditional regions where they have the big coal mines and so on. But in most industrialized countries, coal is not a big issue anymore. No.
Yeah, I want to use this term. You mentioned industrialized. Why? Because within this curve of extraction and this curve of stock, there are of course disparities, geographic disparities, right? And also different levels. There is this idea that there is a saturation curve, right? That as an economy or a society, you need to build up some stock, so artifacts, in order to provide some services. And once you have achieved a certain plateau, then, they taper down and then you're relaxing. So over there, we can think about the same graphs of extraction and stock, but for China, for Europe, let's say the entire Europe, EU 27, and India, for instance, they're extremely different. And for instance, India and China have close, more or less the same population. Now, India is more populous than that, but they don't share at all the same amount of extraction. And also in the saturation curve, of course, we also need to consider that, well, it's not because in Europe some countries have, let's say, their stock stabilized, that this means that it's good. It's a good news, Perhaps it's already too high of a level.
The stocks in most industrial, the stocks are not going down anywhere, or let's say the total mass of stocks is not going down anywhere, I think. But there are some countries where, for example, stocks in machinery are declining a little bit. Yeah, so these cases do happen. We now have, we just 2 weeks ago, our paper was published where we show the version 2 of the so-called MISO model. So you cited the MISO 1 results. But we now have this model on the level of national economies from 1900 to today, more or less. Yeah. Well, at the moment, unfortunately, only 2016, but we are working on that. I should come closer to now. Yeah. And we have it at the level of 16 processes from primary extraction to end of use phase, like recycling or waste management. Yeah. 23 raw materials, 21 stock building materials, and
what a headache already.
and including a breakdown to 13 end use end uses. So we do not only know the number of tons of concrete in the country, but we allocate the concrete to different types of buildings and different type of civil engineering infrastructures like tunnels. And no, we cannot discern tunnels from bridges or ports. This is all civil engineering, which is one category. Of course, it would be very important to break it down further, but that was what was possible with the data and this was a major methodological achievement by Jan Streeck. I don't know whether you've met him.
Perhaps in Vienna during the
perhaps.
conference,
he's one of the rising people in the institute. He has done his PhD in the Matstocks project rather early on, and he's now with us as a postdoc, and he's going very strong. So and one of the major things he developed in a pair of papers that were also included in his PhD thesis in the Journal of Industrial Ecology, where he solved this puzzle for how to do these end-use splits. I mean, of course, we still are aware that they are everything but perfect. Still, it's a huge step ahead. It's a huge step ahead because you have to combine industry statistics with input-output analysis, and they all don't fit together, so it's a headache how to get it together. So this was, in terms of methodological development, this was a really strong development. No?
Yeah.
And now there's a lot you can do with it. No?
So in terms of, let's say, evolution of stocks and flows of different countries, and in terms of saturation, I mean, do you think that, is there any saturation effects visible? Well,
what is visible is that the gross additions to stock of the rich countries are declining, which does not mean that stocks are declining. It's the first derivative of the curve, no?
Yeah.
But the stocks are growing much more slowly, yeah? And this, of course, also changes the metabolic pattern of these countries. Yeah, we are at the moment starting to analyze these things with analytical statistics and econometric methods, right? So that's the first step to kind of get to grips what is happening there, because the amount of output you get from that kind of analysis is staggering,
Of course.
Yeah.
So many different countries, so many flows.
It's I think 180 or so countries or so. Yeah, so almost all countries, so 99 or something % of world population and world GDP. Yeah, so, it's really, I mean, I would say, of course, there are countries in there that are where the data quality is questionable, but for the big countries and the big regions and so on, this is, of course, a massive step ahead. Yeah. I'm not saying, and it's mass balanced. Each of the 16 processes is mass balanced explicitly with an error term for each of the 16 processes. So you can see how much of the material disappears somewhere in the accounts. Yeah? And you can, in principle, do uncertainty analysis. So we tried to have a full-blown Monte Carlo, whatever thing, and then we found out we will never finish when we do it full-blown, but there's many things you can do to kind of check the error bandwidth of your data. We also have done it for the data. For example, we used, there's a framework for how to classify data and uncertainty, and we applied that, systematically for all the input data, So we did a lot to also get to grips with the uncertainty of all these estimates. No? Yeah. And of course, the model can be used to look into the future. We're at the moment working with people in YASA and also with Stefan Pauliuk to improve on the model in terms of analyzing circularity potentials and their potentials to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we are adding greenhouse gas emissions to the model, And so it will become even more powerful in the future. Yeah, but you can run future scenarios in various modes. Yeah, this is neither optimization or forecasting or so, but you put certain assumptions and then you see what dynamics comes out of it. But demographers do entirely the same thing. The model is almost exactly like a demographic model. It's a cohort model where you have cohorts of stocks, and this is what we work with. Yeah. So,
but there is a huge difference because, for instance, in the integrated assessment models of that are reviewed by the IPCC, they don't necessarily have all of the physical structures and all of the detail that you have, and especially in terms of final use as well. Because at the end of the day, if we want to have this whole discussion with services, with practices and all of that, we need to have disaggregated this by final use. So,
yes, this is work in progress, and we do a little bit on that. Stefan Pauliuk is doing quite a bit on that, and we have a very good collaboration with Volker Krey from YASA. They run the Message IX model, and they have been collaborating with Stefan Pauliuk quite a bit to get materials into this model. And we are now in this Circular project, which I mentioned, where we look at circularity and how much it can contribute to greenhouse gas emission reductions, and also by looking into demand side potentials, not only kind of the upstream improvements in products and so on, but also changes in demand. Yeah. I think, and some of that will also be integrated in the Message IX model. So I hope that the integrated assessment models will become better. Yeah. Which is not to say that I think there's also areas where the integrated assessment models are problematic. So I'm not, but on the other hand, they're very powerful, and improving on them is certainly also worthwhile. But I think it is also important to have other classes of models, like, for example, in land use, where we have also developed a completely different modeling strategy that we call diagnostic modeling of option spaces. And so we have developed a model, and I'm not too much involved in it anymore, but I have been in the beginning and also over the last years until something like 2018 or so, when I started the Mudstocks project. But since I've still sometimes involved in publication projects. But this model is just doing the supply-demand balance based on external assumptions. So you might say it's a super dumb model, but the power is it is based on a very strong data, and it is extremely transparent. So you exactly know what you're doing. Yeah. And it doesn't have any optimization, any dynamics, nothing. But it is very traceable. Yeah. And we've added greenhouse gas emissions to that and looked at various options for, future diets, future bioenergy, and so on and so on. And also looked at whether it's better to set land aside for carbon sequestration or to use the land for producing biofuels, and under what conditions and under what kind of biofuel pathways do you save more greenhouse gases than if you let the land reforest? And then you, for example, discover it's extremely important that biomass is used very efficiently. Yeah. Because if you use it inefficiently, then almost always the land-based carbon sequestration wins. Yeah. It saves more CO2 for the next 50 to 100 years, sometimes even. Yeah. Of course, in the very, very long run, bioenergy always wins. Yeah. When you assume the land is empty at the moment, which of course is a wrong assumption. But in the very long run, this bioenergy always wins. Yeah. But over periods that are really important now for climate policy, in many cases the carbon sinks win, especially if the bioenergy is used inefficiently.
Yeah.
Because then the land would soak up a lot more carbon. No?
Yeah, this notion of trade-offs is, of course, the most interesting one, and
Yes.
to figure out how do we, what is the best trade-offs in all situations. Before we get to the trade-off point, I also wanted to highlight the relationship between the creation of stock, or at least the growth of stock, and the growth of GDP as well. Mm-hmm. It's more or less a one-to-one relationship or something like that.
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky because we are working on a paper where we use our database that we created with the MESO2 model. So I can't say too much on that.
Yeah.
So, but at the global level, we have an absolute one-to-one relationship between growth in stocks and growth of GDP. Yeah. And at the level of world regions, it's more or less similar, but not exactly. Yeah, you get some deviations. Yeah, but these deviations are not so easy to explain, and they also depend on what kind of GDP whether you have purchasing power parities or market exchange rates, whether you use Gary Kami dollars, of the Madison Project, or other GDP indicators, creates quite a diversity of different outcomes. So, but overall, at the level of world regions, you have a strong correlation between stocks and GDP. And it seems that the more developed countries, at a certain point, this relationship breaks. Yeah. And then you have more GDP growth than stock growth, which is kind of a good news, but it doesn't mean stocks are going down. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're still going up, but much slower. Yeah. At a much slower pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. But reductions in stocks, in machinery stocks, we see it in some countries. With built stocks, it's only going up.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah.
But that is very much, the whole question of decoupling as well. We can think about how decoupling can occur when gross stocks are, not going down, which means the resource flows for maintaining them and for operating them cannot go down.
Yeah, but what we see now increasingly is that in countries with strict climate policies, emissions start to decrease. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is some, and also fossil fuel use is starting to decrease. Yeah. So you can have some decoupling there. It's not commensurate with the Paris trajectory, to be sure, yeah. But there is something happening, yeah. And I think it's mostly related to climate policies. It's also partially related to the massively shrinking costs of photovoltaics and wind power, yeah. So the costs of photovoltaics and wind power are now below all fossil fuel power plant. They're far below nuclear. Yeah. And even if you include the difficulty, of stabilizing a grid with these intermittent sources of energy, yeah, which we must not deny, this is a huge problem. Yeah. But it is possible, yeah. It is possible, but at the moment it's very difficult to achieve without a small amount of gas or large capacities of stored hydropower plants, yeah, where you can balance cold and dark periods. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you need some intermediate range electricity production. Yeah. I think it's not so much that it is out of question to do that based on hydrogen in the future. Mm. We will have massively too much electricity in summer with photovoltaics as it's gotten so cheap, no? So at the moment it's still expensive, but I'm very confident that we will have hydrogen. Yeah. Whether we will have enough to get rid of all the natural gas with current structures, that's another question, because it's still an economic question. Yeah. But to have enough to stabilize the grid, I think that's feasible now.
Yeah.
But I mean, it should not encourage using electricity. You know?
Yeah, correct.
So it also depends on whether you go for a very resource-hungry pathway of consumption.
Yeah.
And it is very clear that that you have a choice between, you know, going towards what is now called the high with low pathways. So pathways achieving high quality of life, high level of services that are key to human and social well-being, yeah, with low resource inputs, yeah, which massively lowers resource demand and reduces all these large-scale risks, yeah. And then I'm pretty sure you can expect to be able to produce enough hydrogen, you know, not with current technology, but I think this is something, I mean, it would be a shame, no, if the engineers were not clever enough to figure out how to do that, no?
Yeah.
I mean, we have electrolysis and so on, but as far as I understand, not all of the technical problems are solved here. It's not my field, yeah, but why shouldn't we be able to do that, no? And then this is probably, and I think there's another big potential here that has left untapped, and that would be if you link electromobility with stabilizing the electric grid.
Mm-hmm. Using the battery of the car.
Using the batteries of the car. So, for example, thought experiment, if you wouldn't buy the car with the battery, but if you would buy the car without the battery and have a service of renting filled batteries, the only thing that really inhibits it, you would have to have a standardization limiting the number of different types of batteries to 3 or 5, so that every filling station would not be a filling station, but have a, mechanism to replace batteries with low charge with a filled battery. Yeah. Then you could have all the charging batteries as, they would be available also to stabilize the electric grid to a certain extent. Of course, you would always have to have a certain number that you allow to be filled up, yeah, because those are those that you expect to be renting out during the next day, yeah. But this would require a level of intervention in, car manufacture that, seemed out of possibility for policymakers, yeah. Mm. But I think the EU would be large enough to do it, yeah.
Or even, there is the...
and this would be a massive amount of electricity storage coming online. Yeah. Massive.
If electric cars today also are just using a two-way battery, that's already, for the people living in sprawled areas where they have photovoltaic panels, they can use the battery of their cars themselves for their house and all of this. So all of this seems relatively okay. I'm wondering, okay, so there is this idea of lock-in effects, right, that we have touched upon a couple of times. And there is this idea of practices and needs that we want. So right now we're locked into an unsustainable state. Mm-hmm. The question is, can we lock us into a sustainable state?
Well, this is, of course, not something where you can turn a switch. Yeah. And this is also not something where you can expect, this to be a smooth and easy process. But I think there are some leverage points where you could intervene, and I've touched upon some of those. For example, making life in dense urban settlements attractive. would be a big lever, in my view, for reducing the pressure towards urban sprawl. Yeah, I think this is underestimated, and this is only, expert judgment. I've not done a study on that. I have applied for a study, but in the first attempt it was not funded. I have resubmitted a project proposal where we would touch upon that. We would not solve it, but we would touch upon that. Yeah, I think it would merit a really large-scale project. Yeah, or perhaps several, because it's a huge issue. If from the level of political economy, what actor constellations would have to change to make this happen? I mean, this is a very complex political project because it requires big changes in future patterns of building activities, building infrastructures, and so on. But I think it's a very much underestimated level. Yeah, because there's many ways in which living in urban systems, has advantages. You have more cultural possibilities. You have concerts. You have cinema. You have restaurants. You have libraries. You have all kinds of events and so on that you don't or have in rural areas to a much lower extent, or you have to drive there by car if you want to enjoy that. Yeah. So there's many ways in which urban areas are more, and you have more jobs in the urban areas. Many people commute from these sprawled areas into the dense areas. Yeah, so there's many disadvantages of the sprawled areas, but they have some crucial advantages, and we have to be clear about them, especially for families with small kids. Yeah, because for small kids, of course, I agree, it's really important, and I've been growing up like that. Yeah, it's important that they can go outside and kind of explore the world. Yeah, without too much danger of being run over by cars and so on and so on. Yeah, so I think there are things that we could make possible also in dense settlements, and then this would reduce this push towards the sprawled areas a lot, because then the disadvantages of living in the sprawled areas would become much more noticeable, no? If you could have many of the advantages of living in the city, yeah? Having the urban green, having, being saved from all this noise, of the cars, the risk of being run over, the exhaust emissions, the tire emissions, and so on, yeah? So if you replace that in your head, then in many cases, I think the balance would flip towards preference for living in dense urban settlements. Yeah, and those you can supply with efficient public transit. In many cases, you can supply them very well with bicycles if you have the right bicycle infrastructures. So Vienna is good with the public services. It's not good with the bicycle infrastructure. It's not very good with the walking, but it's kind of okay. But bicycle, Vienna is not good. Yeah. Other cities show how it could be, like Copenhagen. Yeah. So there are the examples. It's a design question, but it's a fight for urban space. That's the real thing. Yeah. But I think this could be a big lever. Yeah. But this, of course, you cannot, we have all these sprawled areas, it's also a huge amount of resources to get rid of them, So it's, it would be political suicide if you were to attempt it, yeah. So how to deal with that is something that has to start from where we are at the moment, yeah. And so that's why I think it is not a good idea to fight against electromobility with electric cars, because there will be a certain extent to which we need individual electric mobility, and it can also be other things than cars. It might be electric bicycles, right? Yeah. So I think we have to be open for that, because it's also not just not realistic to do everything with public transit. But On the other hand, of course, this is not to say we should continue sprawling our landscapes like mad, because this is, of course, very unsustainable, and not only because of the car emissions. Yeah, it's the energy demand, it's the resource demand for building that, for maintaining that, and so on and so on. It's also, I mean, it has huge effects on biodiversity. For example, I know there's a project going on looking at how this increase in sprawl, and there are tipping points involved in that. When the density of settlements or the dispersion of houses becomes too large, yeah, if there's some critical thresholds, then species cannot migrate through the area anymore, yeah, and then these areas become uninhabitable for many species, yeah. And this is actually a tipping phenomenon. It's a percolation phenomenon. So for a long time, you can build more houses and nothing happens. And at a certain point, there are too many houses, and then the species cannot get through anymore, right? So we have these effects on biodiversity and wildlife, yeah. We have the negative effect on landscape aesthetics and so on and so on. So, you know, we always get told that wind power plants are ugly, yeah? But no one tells that sprawled areas are ugly, you know? But I think in many cases they are super ugly, no? The wind turbines are relatively harmless compared to that, no? In many cases, in many instances. Yeah.
Before we go to your latest project, perhaps I wanted to finish with this idea of, you know, the path dependency and the stock flow kind of egg and chicken problem. How do you see this question of dismantling infrastructures to kind of redirect practices and services and all of that? So we have inherited a bunch of linear infrastructures. Do we just divest them? Do we need to dismantle them? Is there any coexistence? How does that happen between the good flows or the good stocks and the bad stocks?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's hard enough to try to invest in the good, in good examples, in good infrastructures as much as you can, including, you know, investing as little as possible in new roads and as much as possible in new railroad systems, right? And more in also high-speed trains instead of airports, yeah, and so on and so on. Yeah, I mean, it's a shame, yeah, that in Europe we don't have that. You know, you can buy an airplane ticket in 2 minutes, yeah. Mm-hmm. If you want to go from, I don't know, Vienna to Spain or to Helsinki or whatever, if you try to do that with a train ticket, alone buying the ticket is an art in itself, no? And then, you know, it takes ages because the trains are not connected, you know, the sleeping car are not available on many routes and so on and so on, so it's not convenient. And, you know, there's a lot to do here. Mm. Yeah. And I think, as far as I understand policy making, politics from the interactions I have had in my life, in kind of, this is not a scientific answer, it's kind of the answer of somebody who has been involved in that, you know, to a certain extent, but not very much. My feeling is that what is feasible is to invest in attractive examples, yeah, and let them develop a certain kind of contagiousness, yeah. But, you know, telling people, yeah, we will come with the bulldozer and tear down your single-family houses, this will not work. Yeah.
I was thinking more about coal power plant, you know, at the beginning. And
yes, with coal power plants, you know, but there is not much fuss about. In Austria, we have had a few coal-fired power plants. There was no big conflicts about shutting them down at a certain point when they were not needed anymore. No, and then of course at a certain point you may be dismantling them. Yeah, I mean that's not so much of an issue, but with these built structures that create resource-intensive sets of practices like the sprawled areas, tearing them down is not, these are huge values owned by individuals, protected by property rights. So this is not, this is political suicide to go into this direction. But I'm not sure whether this is what is needed. I mean, I would not go that direction. I would say it's better to let people experience how attractive it is to live in an environment where you have very good public transit, where you live in a 15-minute city, or some now even aim at a 10-minute city where you can reach everything you need for your daily life in 10 minutes on foot or on bicycle. And this may turn out to be super attractive. And, owning a car is not such an attractive thing after all, except for some, toxic masculinity reasons, right? Because, it costs a huge amount of money. You have to work a lot for that, You have to bring the car to the car mechanic. You have to care about the insurance for your car. You may have an accident. You run into all kinds of nuisances, right? Even if you didn't do anything wrong, but still, being involved in an accident is not a nice thing, especially if somebody got hurt, no? Even if you didn't get hurt yourself, and also that can happen, no? So, I think there's many downsides of being car dependent, and, taking cars away from people is not a good idea as a policymaker, but enabling forms of living that are not car dependent and letting people experience that they can be very, that can be very attractive. Perhaps when you have the ability to rent a car, if you want to have a nice weekend trip to the mountains, where it's really very difficult to get with public transit because you did the ones where you can get with public transit 7 times and now you want to see a different part of the mountainside. Well, what is wrong with going there with an electric car and going back in the evening and having a nice weekend trip, no? I mean, we should not create this image that we have to live a dull life with restrictions all around the place, This will not be an attractive world to show to people, but let people experience what kind of downsides, all these dependencies they get into in certain structures, Once you take away the fascination of having 150 horsepower, and having the acceleration of this strong car, And if this is very important for you, the electric car can do it even better. Because the electric motor is superior to the internal combustion engine in any aspect except for the storability of electricity. And this is being solved with very high speed at the moment. So I think it's very dangerous to create these visions of having to live a life in poverty with all kinds of super fierce restrictions and being forced to abandon your schnitzel or whatever, I think this is stupid. And I don't think this is the life I want for myself, and I don't think this is the life I want to impose on anybody else. And it's actually not needed. I mean, whether you want to eat schnitzel or any other kind of meat or not, that's not the point. The question is how much you eat, no? For the planet, For planetary health, it's not, you don't have to forgo eating meat, For your own health, you should, eat about only 1/3 or 1/4 of the meat that people eat now in Europe or US on average, That's good for your own health, And going down to that level is enough for the planet. And it's good for your own health. So I think we have to have these positive narratives, and we have to enable fulfilling lives, that are good lives and not deprived lives because we have to save the planet. I think we have been, and I think we have, I mean, this is kind of, I cannot prove it, but I think it's, to me, it's kind of, we have fallen in the trap, but I think we also have been pushed into the trap of always preaching sacrifice. And I think it's very destructive because we open, we are open to aggressive arguments against, climate change mitigation and reducing emissions, and because people, but when you have this in social media discussions, when you say, well, it's so. Here we show a good example of a green city where you have a very good life without cars, and then people say, you don't want the lives of people be rescued when they have a heart attack because the ambulance can't go there, yeah. And this is of course not true, yeah. But this is the kind of frames we are confronted with, yeah, and that are super successful, unfortunately. Mm. For example, because some autocrats in our vicinity have discovered this is a very efficient means of dividing our societies, and they are supporting all kinds of communication frames that do that, yeah, because they want to continue to sell natural gas to us, no?
Let's perhaps conclude with your the new projects that you have launched, perhaps like future pathways of research. Like after doing this triangle of stocks, flows, and practice or service, what are some new elements that you want to tackle now in your new project that you have just launched?
Yeah, well, I think there's two key directions that I'm currently pursuing, and this project will help us to do so. And one is to look at resilience in the sense of non-linear disruptions that may, and the question of how robust or able to survive or able to function our systems are when it comes to such disruptions. And this you could call the resilience of social metabolism, yeah, to disruptive events and disruptions, especially of supply chains, yeah, that may be related to wars or conflicts or tensions or trade wars even, or climate impacts or chance events like ships blocking transport routes, no? And at the moment, the methods we use to analyze social metabolism are not at all able to address that, because they are either descriptive, just, you try to trace resource use, yeah, find out how much resources we are using for what and so on, or they are static, like the multi-regional input-output models, or the environmentally extended, which we calculate, for example, material footprints, yeah, of consumption, yeah. They are static. There's no dynamics in them. Yeah, they are for a certain year, and they have a deep level of structural detail, yeah, but they are static, and whatever you can get out of them assumes the current structure of production consumption systems and trade systems globally, yeah. And when they are then dynamic, like the dynamic material flow models, stock flow models, like the MESO model, where we just published version 2, where we go to the country level, they are dynamic, but they are simple stock flow models. They don't have any non-linearity in them. It's just, stock flow models where additions to stock increase a stock, and you have no non-linear effects, yeah. And when certain supplies don't come, you can't say what happens, right? In the end, you can say, well, this amount of material is missing, but what it means to the economy or to the ability to provide certain services, you just don't know. And that's why we are teaming up with people from complexity science, who work with big data-based network models, And those models, of course, have all these features. They can have tipping points. They can have massive changes. They can have rearranging of supply networks after a shock. Yeah. So you have much more realistic representations of what happens when such disruptions occur. Yeah. And of course, this is a massive project. Let's see to what extent we will be able to do that. I hope. But the ultimate goal would to identify some tipping points towards more sustainable patterns. But this is blue sky research.
Yeah.
No idea what happens and whether we will find something. But this would be kind of the holy grail we would like to find. Yeah. And the second direction we want to work in is when we establish these high-resolution representations of social metabolism, and we have not talked about mapping, because what we have also been doing is high-resolution mapping of built structures. Yeah? And this is one way of linking social metabolism with actors, because all these structures are owned by somebody. Their property rights through which they are used, they belong to certain actors. Yeah, they are governed by regulations. Yeah, and so they are a way of linking social metabolism with kind of the world of, let's say, political economy, provisioning system research, because many of these services that are crucial for enabling a good life for everybody, they are provided through provisioning systems where you have stocks, where you have resource flows involved in provision of systems, but you also have actors and institutions, organizations, you have companies, you have supply chains, and so on and so on. Yeah. And at the moment, with social metabolism methods, where we start with the national scale, and MESO2 is still on a national scale, despite all the fine detail that we now have achieved, yeah, you're not at the level of the actors, yeah. So we hope to be able to understand what we call malleability of social metabolism, meaning the ability of societies to shape these resource patterns in desired, and I hope more sustainable directions, yeah. And to understand that malleability, yeah, you need to be able to link resource stocks and flows with actors, institutions, power relationships, and all these questions that determine about how future patterns of stocks are built, for example, when we talk about built environments, or what types of machines or products accumulate in our societies and so on. Yeah, so I think there is the hope that we will understand a lot better through this higher level of granularity, yeah, options of intervening into those processes, yeah, and their implications, and also how they are affected by disruptions, yeah, because perhaps strategies to reduce dependency on critical imports may also, go hand in hand with efforts to replace some materials with less dirty or problematic resources, or reducing resource use overall, yeah, by having more, for example, more energy efficient buildings. Yeah, I mean, we must not forget about that. Quite a substantial fraction of the energy we use is to heat and cool buildings. No, so, and you can do that through very poorly insulated buildings where you need a lot of energy for the same service of having a comfortable room. Yeah, or you can do it with very well built buildings. I mean, this is a policy field that exists, but still there is quite a potential to get better. Yeah. So I think these are directions where I hope we might find some ways to also intervene into that process.
I'm very much looking forward to MESO 3.0. Many thanks, Helmut, for this discussion.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you everyone as well to listening and watching. I highly encourage you to listen and watch the episode, for instance, in provisioning systems. We talked with Julia Steinberger.
Yes.
Tim Lenton on tipping points, for instance. I'm also discussed with your colleague Dominic Widenhofer. So do have a look at these episodes as well. I'm going to link them in. So
you will discuss with Ilona Otto?
Yes, just after that. So our episode with Ilona Otto will also be on social tipping points. So stay tuned.
Yes.
Many thanks.